Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Coaster Mafia. Today we're going to be taking a look at one of the most iconic roller coaster models out there, the B&M Hyper, and ranking them from the worst to the best. Before we get into things, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on that little notification bell so you can be alerted whenever Coaster Mafia drops a video. And today we need you guys to bury that like button for us. And in the comments down below, tell us what B&M Hypers you've ridden and which ones are your favorite. And of course, we do got our Coaster Mafia merch store link in the description. Get yourself one of these fine Coaster Mafia shirts. And with that, let's get right into it. The B&M Hyper is one of the most iconic roller coaster models out there. They strike a perfect balance as they have these massive drops and endless airtime hills, while also not being overly intense that they might alienate some of the general public, leading them to be massive crowd pleasers in each one of the top draws of their respective parks. B&M Hypers are truly a special roller coaster model. I mean, I'd argue they're probably the most fun you'll ever have on a roller coaster. And they're just the kind of rides that you're going into a park you haven't been on the roller coasters yet, but you already know the B&M Hyper is going to be a really good ride. The company has this formula down pat. Everything works every time. I mean, even this ranking, they're all rides between like a 7 and a 9. They're all really good to fantastic. There's nothing really bad here. But what's nice is that each one of them has their own little bit of character that'll make them worth discussing. You know, one thing that I think that really makes B&M Hypers work is really just their setup here. They have fantastic restraints. They have these nice clamshell restraints that leave you a lot of room for mobility, as well as, they give you nice room for some airtime as well. And they're still comfortable, and they still keep you in there pretty good. From there, the layouts are always good. You always know what you're going to get. You're going to have a fantastic first drop, lots of great airtime moments, and often a great setting, leading to some really good spectacle. These rides are crowd pleasers for a reason. Now, before I get into the ranking here, we're going to do a little bit of a disclaimer. So there are 9 traditional B&M Hypers in North America. I have been on all of those. There's also the 3 Giga coasters, which B&M, RCDB still classifies as their hyper coasters, but they're really so much different in execution and experience that I don't think it would be fair to include them on this list. There's also Goliath at La Ronde, which I have not been on. That ride is under 200 feet anyways, and even though it rides similarly to the other rides on this list, since, it is smaller and I have not been on it, I didn't think it would be a big omission to not talk about it. Rather just talk about the 9 traditional 200-foot B&M Hypers. So all these rides feature either a height of 200 feet or a drop of 200 feet. So to kick things off, we are heading to the Midwest to Gurnee, Illinois, as the weakest B&M Hyper is Raging Bull at Six Flags Great America. This is one of the earliest hypers that B&M made, and it's very clear that the company was still kind of working out the kinks and perfecting the formula. Unlike a traditional out and back layout, Raging Bull has more of a twister layout with less camelbacks and a lot more helixes and massive turnarounds. Overall, I can't help but feel like this ride is a bit underwhelming in that sense, as the best B&M Hypers, have copious amounts of airtime. The first drop on this isn't bad, especially if you're in the back row. It's as good as any that you're going to get on these B&M Hypers, made even better by the ride's pre-drop, allowing you to get more pull over that first drop. But past that, there's really only a couple other moments of solid floater airtime, and the rest of the ride just feels like it meanders through its layout. And it's interesting, because even though the rides above it on this list have a lot more airtime, I also feel like they execute, the turnarounds, as well as the helixes, a lot of those other elements a lot better than Raging Bull does, often providing some really good force that I really didn't get on my rides on Raging Bull. Overall, while I do think Raging Bull is still a really good coaster, it's still very comfortable to ride, has that sense of scale to it with its big height and big first drop, I can't help but feel that it is a step down from the other B&M Hypers in North America. Raging Bull is the only B&M Hyper I would even consider giving a rating to that's below an 8. The rest of these rides are all standouts and they're consistently fantastic. And at number 8, we are going down south to the border of the Carolinas to talk about Thunder Striker, formerly Intimidator at Carowinds. See, up until this past year, Thunder Striker was known as Intimidator to honor the legendary Dale Earnhardt. However, since that license expired, the park opted to instead just give it a fairly generic name and theme, hence we have Thunder Striker. Now, when I wrote it, it was in its Intimidator form, so that's kind of what I'm basing this off of. And if there was one B&M Hyper that I would say is, I guess, generic, this probably would be the one. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Thunder Striker has pretty much all of the trademark elements you come to expect on a good B&M Hyper. From that fantastic first drop to the sea and wealth of camelback hills that each deliver some really good floater air. Now, at the same time, I just feel that Thunder Striker doesn't really bring anything to the table that we haven't seen done better in the hypers further up on this list. There's not really any elements that stand out to me, and the ride setting isn't particularly exciting either. Again, these aren't really knocks on the ride. It's a great coaster and one that's always worth a few laps at on a visit to Carowinds. It's just that when you're trying to compare all of these similar roller coasters, you gotta be kind of nitpicky with this kind of stuff. Where is if I was just talking about Thunder Striker on its own, I would sit here and tell you that it is a great ride. There's a lot to love about it, but I do feel like there's just more memorable stuff to love about the coasters above it on the list. And coming in at number 7, we got Apollo's Chariot at Busch Gardens, Williamsburg. Apollo's Chariot was the first hyper that B&M ever built, and to this day it's still impressive just what they were able to accomplish here. Apollo creates the framework that would be perfected on later B&M hypers, but it still does a great job on its own. First off, the setting of this ride is absolutely gorgeous, and the ride takes advantage of the forested setting and the terrain to add some really unique character to the ride experience. The layout has to be Apollo's biggest strength. You start off with that pre-drop similar to Raging Bull, which allows the train to build up some speed before you go down the fantastic 200-foot drop. From there, you dive in and out of the forest over the ride's camelback hills. You have a fantastic turnaround section right by the water. And then you also have some really solid airtime moments at the end of the ride that take advantage of the terrain and can even catch you off guard. I would say this ride is not nearly as powerful in the airtime department as the rides above it on this list. Few of the hills don't hit as hard as they should, but overall the ride is aged really well. It is still very smooth, and the unique qualities of the layout make it a very memorable ride against the others on this list. I do feel like B&M improves the formula more going forward, but you gotta respect Apollo's Chariot for everything it accomplishes and just that amazing setting combined with the exhilarating ride. Now, coming in at number 6, we have Diamondback at Kings Island. Now, this might be my hottest take of this video. This ride is pretty revered in the coaster community, and the vast majority of people I talk to would rank Diamondback as one of the top B&M hypers. However, I've never really felt that sentiment. Don't get me wrong, Diamondback is still very impressive. This is one of the largest and fastest B&M hypers out there, topping off at 80 miles an hour, and features all of the classic elements. You have some really good camelback hills, a nice long layout, and this ride also has a very beautiful setting going through the woods at Kings Island, and the ride finishes with a very scenic splashdown, which makes for a very cinematic experience both on ride and off ride. That said, I can't help but feel that other B&M hypers just have slightly better layouts and execution. Not all of the airtime on Diamondback hits as hard as the ones above it on this list. And I also think the layouts of the rides above it are just a bit better utilized with some better pacing and better choice of elements. That said, I still really do respect Diamondback for what it is. It is a very exciting ride and a must do whenever you're at Kings Island. Now, coming in at number 5, right in the middle of the list, is Nitro at Six Flags Great Adventure. Whereas I found Diamondback to be a bit overrated, I find Nitro to be a bit underrated. Nitro always seems to be taking a lot of flack, and I never really understood why. On all of my rides on it, I found it to have copious amounts of airtime and a great layout. The setting of Nitro is also fantastic. It's nice in the woods. You go out of the park, which makes for a very exhilarating and exciting experience. And again, the layout here is solid. You have a bunch of strong camelbacks that each deliver great floater air, and you also have a helix midway through the ride, which is surprisingly forceful. The return run is really good as well, as all the smaller hills hit particularly hard. Maybe it's just bias for me because I've had some nice rides on Nitro, especially some nice sunset rides, but there's just a soft spot that I have for this attraction, and it also helps that the airtime here is always hit really well for me. While I do still find the rides above it to be a bit more powerful than Nitro, I still believe that Nitro deserves more respect than it currently gets. Again, from the setting to the solid layout to the decent forces that this ride pulls, despite being one of the older B&M hypers, I find that Nitro holds up exceptionally well. Now, for number 4, we're heading to Canada's Wonderland for Behemoth. First off, awesome name. Definitely one of my favorite roller coaster names out there. And I'd say it lives up to the hype. Behemoth is arguably the most pure airtime machine out of any of the rides on this list. The vast majority of the elements here is just airtime hill after airtime hill. These massive camelbacks that all absolutely deliver some of the best floater airtime you're going to find. Behemoth might not have the nice wooded setting of the rides I just talked about, but the experience is where Behemoth really shines. Again, these hills hit just the way they should. They're fantastic floater. The layout pretty much doesn't waste any time here. You have a few hills, a nice turnaround, a few more hills, mid course, a solid helix before going into a few hills into the breaks. Behemoth doesn't necessarily have that wow factor that you're going to see in my top 3, but for what it is, it does everything a B&M Hyper is supposed to do about as well as you could. The ride setting might not be the most exciting, and there isn't necessarily that one or two elements that'll absolutely knock your socks off, but Behemoth really is a full package and one of the best rides at Canada's Wonderland. So those previous 5 coasters are pretty much the middle tier of the B&M hypers. They're all great rides, each in their own ways, and they're all standouts at their respective parks. But these final 3 really are the cream of the crop. These are the kind of rides you go out of your way to ride and ride again and again and again. They're some of the best roller coasters out there and the peak of what B&M can do with their hyper model. Now, for the first park in this elite category, we're going over to Central PA for the newest B&M Hyper in North America. Of course, I'm talking about Candemonium at Hershey Park. Hershey Park has one of my favorite collections of roller coasters, and Candemonium is yet another highlight of this park. Whereas Wildcats Revenge, Storm Runner, and Skyrush are all aggressive thrill machines, Candemonium is much more of a general crowd pleaser and provides a great change of pace. This ride has pretty much all of the signature elements that B&M has perfected over the years. You have that amazing setting. The ride goes out into the woods, which is really nice. It makes for a great night ride. But then you also have some of the best airtime hills on any of these coasters I've talked about up to this point. That first camelback after the first drop, especially, gives you multiple seconds of sustained floater air. The ride also mixes in some modern elements, such as a really nice speed hill providing some strong airtime, as well as a wave element that just changes things up nicely. I also have to commend Hershey Park for their whole revamp of the park entrance, with Candemonium being the centerpiece, as it's a really stunning way to enter the park, and that Kisses fountain that the ride interacts with makes for a very exciting moment both on ride as well as makes for some great shots off ride. Overall, Candemonium feels like years of experience paying off for B&M. This ride has some of the best airtime of any of the rides on this list, and really is a showstopper at a park already loaded with showstoppers. Now, coming in at the runner-up position, we have Mako at SeaWorld Orlando. Mako was the first of these hypercoasters that I ever experienced, and it took me a long time to find one that was better. This ride is absolutely phenomenal from the drop to the brakes and is loaded with some of the best airtime, not just on a B&M Hyper, but on any coaster I've ever done. There's multiple airtime hills here that give you seconds at a time of sustained floater air. And when you combine that with just a fantastic layout with no dead spots to be found, as well as a beautiful setting by the water, and there's so much to commend B&M and SeaWorld for their accomplishments on Mako. Well, just like Candemonium, Mako feels like a culmination of years of experience from B&M in perfecting their hyper model. Every turnaround here is forceful and exciting. No bit of track feels wasted. And a lot of people call out the ending of the ride for being kind of a bit dull. However, I've always enjoyed that final turn over the water. Just a nice scenic moment on ride. And overall, Mako pretty much does everything you could possibly want out of a great hypercoaster. From the copious amounts of strong airtime to just the beautiful setting to just the nice, comfortable, smooth ride experience. There's just so much to love about Mako. But there is still one more coaster to talk about, and that's Goliath at Six Flags Over Georgia. Goliath really is on another level. It's interesting, as most of these coasters, I wouldn't exactly call them intense rides. They're all very exciting, but they also do a good job being fairly accessible, not being overly aggressive or overly intense. What makes Goliath so impressive is its ability to blend this grace and elegance with some power and force that you really don't see in full on any of the other rides up to this point on the list. I mean, there's some moments here, particularly the helix midway through the ride, that will have you graying out. It is one of the most intense helixes that I can remember on anything I've ever ridden. And the ride as a whole just feels like it has a whole nother notch of power all the way throughout. The layout here is flawless from start to finish. Again, not a single dead spot, but there's just this added level of intensity. I mean, every airtime hill hits perfectly hard. You have moments that perfectly balance floater and ejector air. And again, there's just not a single dead spot. It's really impressive as I feel like this ride kind of goes above and beyond what's required of a B&M Hyper and ends up being one of the best coasters I've ever done. In fact, this ride pretty much sits right outside my top 10 roller coasters and overall is my clear-cut favorite of the B&M Hypers. While each of these coasters are standouts at their parks, the execution of Goliath is just a cut above the rest. And there you guys have it, the ranking of all of the B&M hypercoasters in North America. These are all really good rides and all standouts at their respective parks. So if you're visiting any one of these parks and you know about this coaster, then you should know you're in for a really good time. Now, of course, if you guys liked watching this video today, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. This was a lot of fun to make, and I want to keep making these videos for you. So feel free to leave some feedback in the comments as well, or maybe some videos that you would like to see in the future. This is, again, Coaster Mafia signing off, and don't forget to keep it Mafia.